The candlelight flickered over the untouched slice of cake, its flame trembling the way her hands used to when she held her late husband's photograph. Outside, snow whispered against the window, soft as memory. Inside, everything stood too still. A room filled with presents but no warmth. Eleanor Wright sat at the table in her favorite cardigan, the one her husband Henry had bought her the year before he passed. Pale lavender wool, slightly worn at the elbows, faintly scented with the rosewater she used to dab behind her ears. On the table before her lay a birthday card, unsigned. It had come from her son, Peter, who dropped her off that morning at the Maplewood Retirement Center with a gentle smile and an even gentler lie. "Just for a few days, Mom," he'd said, placing her suitcase by the door. "They'll take good care of you here. You need company. You'll love it." But the way he'd avoided her eyes told her the truth long before the door closed. The last thing she saw as his car pulled away was the reflection of the candle's flame in the rear window, the smallest funeral for the life she'd known. Welcome to True Voice. If you're watching this, like and subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. Her voice cracked as she whispered it, a small attempt to make the loneliness feel less endless. Eleanor wasn't angry. Not yet. Grief had softened even her pain into something quiet, something almost fragile. She sat by the window of her new room, watching the world blur through the snowfall. The view was a parking lot, the kind that looked beautiful only if you didn't stare too long. A crooked bird feeder hung from a rusted pole outside, swaying in the wind. It was her 68th birthday, and her son had left her in a place where birthdays were celebrated with paper hats and lukewarm coffee. The staff at Maplewood were kind in the way people are kind when they've learned to ration their empathy. Polite smiles, practiced warmth. They brought her tea and asked if she needed help adjusting the thermostat. One nurse, a young woman named May, noticed the candle still burning on the table. "Would you like me to take that, Mrs. Wright?" Eleanor looked at it for a long moment. "No, dear. Let it finish burning. It's the only thing still doing what it was meant to." May smiled softly and left. When the flame finally died, Eleanor whispered, "Happy birthday to me," and turned off the light. That night, she dreamed of the house she used to keep, sunlight spilling over white curtains, the sound of Henry's laughter in the garden, Peter running barefoot down the hallway with chocolate on his face. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears she didn't remember shedding. Days passed. The snow melted. Spring tried to find its way through the cracks. Eleanor kept to herself mostly, reading in the library or sitting in the courtyard with a blanket over her knees. She wasn't bitter, not even toward Peter. He'd become busy, consumed by his job, his wife, their mortgage, the world. "You wouldn't understand, Mom," he'd once said when she offered to help. And perhaps he was right. But there was something about the way he'd looked relieved when he left her at Maplewood that haunted her. The staff encouraged her to join the weekly bingo games to meet people, but she preferred the quiet. Until one afternoon, a man in a faded blue cardigan sat beside her in the courtyard, holding a cracked chessboard. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She looked up surprised. "Not at all. Name's George. Used to be a teacher. You play?" She smiled faintly. "My husband tried to teach me once. I was better at watching than winning." George chuckled. "Then you'll do fine. The key is to stay still long enough to see what the other person missed." They played in silence, sunlight warming the skin on her hands. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel invisible. Later that evening, she wrote in her small notebook, the one she'd started keeping since Henry's death. "Sometimes kindness comes quietly, like a shadow that sits beside you until you realize it's light." The following morning, a letter arrived, forwarded from her old home. The handwriting was familiar. Peter's wife, Emily. Inside was a short note. "Mom, Peter asked me to send your mail. We've been meaning to come visit. Maybe next month. Hope you're settling in. Love, Emily." A single folded bank statement was tucked behind it, though it wasn't hers. The name at the top read Peter Wright, and the numbers glowed in black ink. Overdraft notices, maxed out credit, missed mortgage payments. Eleanor frowned. She hadn't asked for his finances, but fate has a cruel sense of timing. That evening, she stared at the paper under the lamp. Perhaps now she thought she understood. Peter hadn't left her because he stopped loving her. He'd left her because life had gotten too heavy, and she was the easiest weight to set down. She folded the statement neatly and placed it in her journal. "I forgive you," she whispered into the still air. "But I won't forget." Weeks turned to a month. Eleanor found rhythm in her days. Breakfast at 7, a walk at 9, tea at 4. She laughed sometimes with George, who always brought her a mint from the cafeteria. She planted a small pot of violets on the windowsill. They bloomed quickly, hungry for light. Then, one quiet Tuesday morning, something extraordinary happened. She was sipping her tea in the lounge when May, the young nurse, approached holding an envelope. "This came for you, Mrs. Wright. Looks official." Eleanor smiled politely and opened it. It was from the state lottery office. At first, she thought it was junk mail, another brochure about senior discounts. But then her eyes caught the words. "Congratulations. Matched 6 numbers. Claim notified." The ticket she had bought months ago, the one Henry used to call her Little Hope ritual, had been tucked inside her wallet since the funeral. Her hands trembled. She read the amount twice, her heart beating louder each time. $6.4 million. The teacup clinked against its saucer as she set it down. George, sitting nearby, looked over. "Everything all right, Eleanor?" She nodded slowly, a faint smile touching her lips. "I think," she whispered, "time just changed its mind about me." The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, signatures, and disbelief. The nursing home staff watched as the quiet widow with soft eyes and folded hands suddenly became the woman everyone wanted to help. But Eleanor stayed calm, graceful, grounded. Money didn't change who she was. It only reminded her who she'd been before life made her small. When the funds cleared, she did something no one expected. She requested a transfer to the private wing of Maplewood, not to escape but to observe. She wasn't ready to leave yet. Not until she decided what to do with her son. Each night, she lay awake listening to the wind brush against her window, her mind replaying Peter's voice. "You'll love it here, Mom." Now she smiled softly to herself. "Maybe I will," she murmured. "But not for the reason you think." Eleanor didn't tell anyone about the money at first. She carried the news inside her the way one carries a secret prayer, not as a boast but as something sacred. She still took her tea at 4, still folded her sweaters neatly, still tended to her violets on the windowsill. Only now, when the morning sun touched the petals, she smiled differently. The world hadn't given her justice. It had given her a choice. The first thing she did was call May into her room. The young nurse entered, curious, wiping her hands on her apron. "You look happy today, Mrs. Wright," she said. Eleanor nodded. "Do you know why violets grow best in the shade?" May smiled, unsure. "Why's that?" "Because light means nothing to them unless they've known the dark." She handed May a folded envelope. Inside was a check, enough to cover her student loans twice over. "For your kindness," Eleanor said softly. "You never made me feel like I'd been left. You made me feel like I was waiting to be found." Tears welled in May's eyes. I can't accept this." "You already did," Eleanor replied gently. "The day you sat with me when everyone else went to lunch." The next week, she funded a small library for the home. Nothing grand, just shelves of books, puzzles, and soft armchairs by the window. She asked the maintenance man to fix the old record player and bought a collection of Henry's favorite jazz albums. The residents called her our angel, though she never saw herself that way. In truth, she was simply rediscovering the part of herself Peter had forgotten, the woman who once ran a home filled with warmth, who baked bread for neighbors, who believed that love was its own inheritance. Word spread quietly among the staff that Mrs. Wright had come into some luck. They didn't pry. In places like Maplewood, dignity was a currency of its own. But one evening, as she read by the fireplace, a familiar voice startled her. "Mom!" Peter stood at the doorway, awkward in his expensive coat, holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers. His wife Emily trailed behind, her smile polite but tight. Eleanor closed her book slowly. "Peter." "Emily. You look well," he said, clearing his throat. "We've been meaning to visit." Eleanor's eyes softened, but her heartbeat didn't. "A month later than you promised." He chuckled nervously. "Things have been crazy. The market, work, you know how it is." She nodded faintly. "Yes, I do." He placed the flowers on her table, glancing around the upgraded suite, the new furniture, the paintings, the faint scent of lilies. "This room looks different. Did the home renovate?" Eleanor smiled. "Something like that." Emily shifted, pretending to admire the view. "Peter said you've made new friends here." "That's good. It's nice you're settled." "Settled." The word stung like a pin through silk. Eleanor poured tea, her movements slow, deliberate. "Do you know what I've learned here, Peter?" she asked. "People think being left behind is the same as being forgotten. But it isn't. Sometimes it's just the world giving you a chance to start again, without the ones who underestimated you." Peter's brow furrowed. "Mom, that's not fair. We didn't abandon you. We thought." "You thought I'd be happier tucked away," she interrupted softly. "Somewhere quiet, out of sight." He looked down, guilt flickering behind his eyes. She placed a teacup in front of him. "Drink. It's chamomile. Calms the conscience." For a long time no one spoke. The clock ticked between them, steady and merciless. Finally Peter exhaled. "We've been having a tough year," he admitted. "I didn't want to worry you. I thought, maybe if we sold the house we could start over." Eleanor's hand froze midair. "You sold it?" He nodded, quick and defensive. "We had to. The mortgage was impossible. I was going to tell you once it was settled." The room seemed to shrink. Her old home, Henry's roses, the porch swing, the oak tree with their initials, gone. "Sold." She stared at her son, her voice calm but hollow. "And my things?" "Henry's watch. The letters. They're safe," he said too fast. "We just had to move a few things. It's temporary." Eleanor smiled faintly, though her eyes were wet. "Temporary," she repeated. "That's what you called this place too." Emily tried to interject, but Eleanor raised her hand gently. "It's all right. You've made your choices. And I've made mine." Peter sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, please don't make this harder. I'm not, she said. You already did. He looked at her, searching for anger, but found only stillness. That frightened him more. They left soon after, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. When the door closed, Eleanor let herself cry, not out of sorrow but release. The tears that came were not for loss, but for clarity. That night, she took out Henry's old photograph. You were right, she whispered. People show you who they are when they think you have nothing left to give. The next morning, she called a lawyer. Mrs. Wright, he said after introductions. What can I help you with today? She smiled. I'd like to discuss a few investments, and one final gift. Over the following weeks, Eleanor quietly purchased several properties through a trust. She never flaunted her wealth. She simply redirected it. The nursing home got new equipment, staff bonuses, and a garden renovation. A struggling bakery nearby found its bills mysteriously paid. And then, one afternoon, as she walked past a television in the lounge, she overheard a news segment. A familiar voice. Real estate developer Peter Wright faces foreclosure on multiple properties after a series of failed investments. Eleanor stopped, her heart steady. Fate had a sense of symmetry. She turned to George, who sat knitting beside her. Funny, isn't it? How storms visit the ones who once left you in the rain. He smiled. Life keeps its own books, Eleanor. The rest of us just wait for the balance. That evening, she sat by the window, the sun melting over the horizon in shades of gold and violet. The same colors that filled her husband's paintings. The same warmth she thought she'd never feel again. And as the first stars appeared, she whispered, I forgive you, Peter, but I will not rescue you. Some lessons can't be bought, only lived. Still, she wasn't done. A few days later, she received a letter from the attorney handling her estate. All the paperwork has been completed, it read. The trust is secured. Ownership transfer confirmed. Eleanor nodded to herself. Everything was in place. That night, she dreamed of Henry again. He stood in the garden, hands in his pockets, smiling the way he used to, patient, knowing. What now? He asked her softly. Eleanor looked at the horizon behind him, where dawn began to glow. Now, she whispered, we begin again. Summer arrived early that year, the kind that made everything shimmer with false warmth. The Maplewood garden buzzed with life, bees tumbling through blossoms, nurses pushing wheelchairs under the soft hum of wind chimes. Eleanor sat beneath the gazebo, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in half an hour. Her lawyer had called that morning with the final confirmation. The deed was hers. The property her son lived in, the one he had bought with borrowed money, the one he'd nearly lost to foreclosure, now belonged entirely to her through the trust she'd established under a different name. It had taken only one quiet meeting and a single signature to shift the balance of power. Not revenge, not cruelty, just balance. She closed her book and whispered to the wind. Grace doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without poison. Later that week, she asked May to drive her into town. I'd like to visit the market, she said. It's been too long since I smelled fresh bread. The market was alive with sound and color, the kind of ordinary beauty that only the lonely truly see. The air was thick with roasted coffee and citrus peel. Eleanor wandered through the stalls until something caught her eye. A small antique shop tucked between a bakery and a florist. Its window display shimmered with watches and old jewelry, each piece holding its own story. The sign above the door read Grayson's Antiques and Timepieces. Inside, the air smelled of polished oak and memory. The shopkeeper, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, looked up from behind the counter. Good morning, he said warmly. Looking for something special? Eleanor hesitated. Then her gaze fell on a glass case by the register. There, among rows of watches, was one she knew better than her own reflection. Henry's Rolex. Her breath caught. The faint scratch on the bezel, the engraving on the back. To Henry. For all our tomorrows. Her knees weakened slightly. Where did you get that? She whispered. The shopkeeper frowned. A young man brought it in a few months ago. Said it was his late father's. He seemed desperate, to be honest. I remember because I told him I'd call if anyone ever came looking for it. Eleanor swallowed hard. Do you remember his name? He smiled gently. Peter Wright. Time stilled around her. The very watch she had promised to keep forever safe. The one Henry had worn every day for 40 years. Sold by her own son. The shopkeeper studied her face. You're his mother, aren't you? She nodded slowly, her voice barely a breath. Yes. He leaned forward, compassion softening his tone. When I bought it, something told me it wasn't really his to sell. Kept it just in case. I never put it in the main display until last week. Eleanor blinked back tears. You called me without knowing you would. The man smiled. Sometimes the heart keeps better records than the books. She reached into her purse and placed a card on the counter. Her lawyer's contact. Please send the full price to this office. And keep the rest for yourself. You did something good today. He handed her the watch carefully, as if returning something sacred. When she stepped outside, sunlight hit the gold face, scattering light across her hand. For a moment, she could almost feel Henry beside her. His laugh, his steady warmth. "I've got it back," she whispered. "The time you left me." That evening, Eleanor sat in her room, the Rolex resting on her palm. Every tick sounded like a heartbeat. Steady, alive, forgiving. Later that night she wrote a letter. "Peter, there are things a mother can forgive, and things she must simply understand. I now understand you, the fear, the pride, the choices that turned you into someone I no longer recognize. I hope you find peace, even if it's not with me. Love, Mum." She sealed it but didn't mail it. Some words were meant to exist only for the writer. A week later, fate delivered the next chapter for her. Peter called. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. I don't know how to say this, but we're losing everything. The house, the car. Emily left. She said she couldn't take it anymore." Eleanor's silence on the other end unnerved him. "I made mistakes," he continued, his words spilling fast. "I was stupid. I thought selling your things would help us. I thought it was temporary. I didn't mean to hurt you." She closed her eyes, her tone calm. "I know, Peter. I always knew." He hesitated. Can I stay with you for a while? Just until I get back on my feet." Her gaze shifted to the window. The same bird feeder still swinging outside, the violets still in bloom. "Of course," she said softly. "Come tomorrow morning." When the call ended, she sat for a long time, the quiet filling the room like fog. Then she called her lawyer again. "Mr. Davies," she said, "please prepare the lease transfer documents. I'd like my son to sign them personally." The next morning, Peter arrived looking smaller than she remembered. His shoulders sagged beneath his wrinkled coat, his eyes hollow. He hugged her awkwardly. "I missed you, Mom." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Did you bring your signature?" He blinked. "What?" She gestured to the papers on the table. "The lease agreement. You'll be renting one of my properties. Close by. Affordable. I think you'll find it fitting." Peter froze. "One of your properties?" Eleanor met his gaze evenly. "Yes, I bought the building last month. Including your apartment." His face went pale. "You what?" "Life has a sense of humor, doesn't it?" she said gently. "You left me at a home you didn't think I could afford. Now you're asking for one I own." He tried to speak, but words tangled in his throat. "I'm not doing this to humiliate you," she continued, her voice steady and kind. "I'm doing this so you can learn what you refuse to see. That dignity isn't given. It's reclaimed." Peter sat down, his head in his hands. "I don't deserve your kindness." "No," she said softly. "But I'll give it anyway." When he finally signed the papers, she placed a hand over his. "You'll pay rent like everyone else. And you'll visit me every Sunday. Not out of guilt, out of gratitude." Tears filled his eyes. "I don't know how to make this right." "You don't," she whispered. "You just start walking toward better." That night, as she watched the moonlight fall across her window, Eleanor realized she wasn't seeking revenge at all. What she wanted was balance, the restoration of her own worth. The Rolex ticked on her bedside table. Each second a reminder that time, once stolen, had been returned to its rightful hands. The seasons turned gently that year, as if time itself wanted to move slower for her. Autumn spilled gold over Maplewood's garden. The air smelled of cinnamon tea and rain on dry leaves. Eleanor found herself walking each morning with George, their steps steady and unhurried, their silences as comforting as conversation. Peter began visiting on Sundays as promised. At first, the visits were stiff, guilt hung between them like unspoken smoke. He'd bring pastries, sometimes flowers, and sit across from her, trying to find the mother he'd once known in the woman who now radiated a calm power he couldn't quite explain. She never mentioned the past. She didn't need to. The quiet was enough. Over time, his posture softened, his eyes clearer. He began to help around Maplewood, fixing chairs, repainting fences. The residents adored him, unaware of who he truly was to Eleanor. One afternoon, she found him in the garden, pruning the rose bushes with uncharacteristic care. "I remember when Dad used to do this," he said softly. "He said roses don't bloom out of love. They bloom out of patience." Eleanor smiled faintly. He was right. Peter hesitated. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you. For letting me back in." "For not," he trailed off. She placed a hand on his arm. "You can thank me by staying kind when life turns cruel. That's what your father and I always wanted for you." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I miss him." "So do I," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Every day. But I think he'd be proud of who you're becoming again." That evening, Eleanor sat by the window as the sun sank behind the nursing home's courtyard. The Rolex lay on the table beside her, catching the amber light. She wound it slowly, listening to its heartbeat echo through the quiet room. Henry's watch had outlived him, and now, somehow, it carried her too. Later that night, May came to check on her. "You look peaceful," she said. Eleanor smiled. "Peace doesn't mean life stops hurting. It just means you've learned to hold the pain without letting it hold you." May sat on the edge of the chair. "You've changed this place, you know. People are happier. The staff, the residents, even me. You make things bloom." Eleanor chuckled softly. Then maybe I've done something right after all. She looked toward the window. The same view that had once made her feel trapped now looked like freedom. In the weeks that followed, she began organizing community events at Maplewood. Storytelling evenings, art exhibits, and music nights. Her name became whispered with admiration around town. The local paper even did a small feature. Widow turned benefactor revitalizes Maplewood. When Peter saw the article, he framed it for her. One Sunday as they shared tea, he said quietly, "I've been thinking, maybe I could volunteer here full-time. Like it. Feels honest." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, her heart swelling with something that felt like home. "Then do it, Peter. Help others find what you almost lost." He nodded, a shy smile breaking through the years of regret. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt that forgiveness could be an inheritance too. As winter crept back, she spent more time by the fire, writing letters. Not to anyone in particular, just to the world she'd finally made peace with. Her handwriting trembled now, but her words carried grace. "When they leave you," one letter read, "don't chase. Stand still. Let the wind carry away what was never meant to stay. Eventually, what's yours will find you again, even if it takes a lifetime." On Christmas morning, Peter arrived early, carrying a small gift box. "It's nothing much," he said, setting it in her hands. Inside was a silver locket. On one side, a picture of Henry holding a young Peter on his shoulders. On the other, a recent photo of the three of them, taken just weeks earlier in the Maplewood garden. Eleanor traced the edges of the photo, her throat tightening. "It's everything," she whispered. They spent the morning together, laughter echoing through the hallways where silence once lived. Later, as twilight fell, Eleanor returned to her room. The fireplace crackled softly, the watch ticked beside her, and the scent of violets filled the air. She closed her notebook, the last page marked with a single line. Some stories don't end in punishment. They end in peace. She leaned back in her chair, eyes closing, her heart full and steady. Outside, snow began to fall again, the same way it had the day Peter left her there. Only now, the light felt warmer. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. Her final words to herself, just above a soft smile, were barely audible. "I found my way home." Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to comment below. You never know whose story might be told next.